There are few things more unsettling in storytelling than the suggestion of a danger we cannot see. From the whispered footsteps in a dark hallway to the eerie silence before something unexplainable occurs, the power of the unseen has always held a unique place in horror and science fiction. The Silent Sea, 2021, Netflix's South Korean sci-fi thriller, understands this principle better than most. Instead of offering its audience a straightforward monster, it presents them with something far more disturbing. A threat that hides in plain sight, something as ordinary as a drop of water, but twisted into a harbinger of death. The very first moments of The Silent Sea grip us with that sense of dread. The camera leads us through the cold metallic corridors of Balhae Station, abandoned yet filled with the weight of something sinister. The silence is suffocating, broken only by faint mechanical hums and the echo of boots against steel. Then, without warning, comes the sound we instinctively fear, a human scream, desperate and raw, but without any clear attacker in sight. We don't know what caused it, but we understand enough. Something unseen is stalking these halls. That is the hook. From the beginning, the show tells us that this is not about the obvious or the visible. The true horror lies in absence, the absence of explanation, of control, of visibility. We are not being chased by a monster we can fight. Instead, we are surrounded by an enemy we cannot grasp. And this sets up the central puzzle that drives the story forward. What exactly is this invisible threat? Why does it inspire such palpable fear? And why does it feel more terrifying than the most grotesque alien or the most destructive weapon? The brilliance of The Silent Sea lies in how it refuses to give away the answer too quickly. For much of the series, we are left in the same position as the characters. Confused, uneasy, suspicious. The tension is stretched thin across each moment, forcing us to imagine horrors that are often more frightening than what is revealed. This strategy is not accidental. It's a carefully constructed narrative weapon. By withholding the form of the threat, the story ensures that both the characters and the viewers remain trapped in a state of perpetual uncertainty. But The Silent Sea is not just another survival thriller set in space. Its invisible danger is layered with metaphor and meaning. On one level, it functions as a gripping plot device designed to keep audiences glued to the screen. On another, it resonates with some of the most urgent anxieties of our own world. The fear of invisible pathogens, the unpredictability of ecological collapse, the consequences of human overreach and ambition. By presenting water, humanity's most essential resource, as something deadly and uncontrollable, the series flips a familiar symbol of life into one of death, turning comfort into terror. Before we dive into how the invisible threat evolves, destabilizes the crew, and mirrors humanity's flaws, it's important to situate The Silent Sea in its broader context. Released in 2021, at the height of the global pandemic, the show landed in a cultural moment already dominated by anxieties about contagion, scarcity, and survival. The idea of an unseen danger spreading uncontrollably was not abstract, it was lived experience. This real-world backdrop made the series hit harder, its fictional horrors amplified by the audience's own memories of masks, lockdowns, and news alerts about infection rates. Watching The Silent Sea in that moment meant confronting fears we were already carrying with us into the story. Yet the series does not rely on pandemic allegory alone. Its setting, a decaying lunar research station, brings a classic sci-fi twist: isolation in the void of space. For decades, science fiction has used space travel as a stage to explore humanity's fragility. Films like Alien, 1979, and Event Horizon, 1997, turned spacecraft into haunted houses, enclosed arenas where the line between technology and terror blurs. The Silent Sea builds on that tradition but strips it down to its bare essence. Instead of showing us the creature that stalks the crew, it leaves us with silence, with water dripping in places it shouldn't, with shadows cast by something that refuses to appear. This minimalism is deliberate and effective. When horror is left unseen, our imaginations rush to fill the gaps, and no special effect can compete with what the human mind invents. Every creak of the station, every locked door, every unaccounted-for movement becomes a threat. The audience, like the characters, becomes hyper-alert, scanning for danger in every frame. But why water? Why take something so ordinary and essential, and turn it into an object of terror? That creative choice is not only clever, it's thematically loaded. Water has always symbolized life, purity, and renewal. It is the most basic requirement for human survival, and on Earth, it flows so abundantly that we rarely pause to consider its absence. Yet in space, water is the ultimate scarcity. Entire missions hinge on how much can be carried, conserved, or recycled. To take this element and invert its meaning, transforming it from salvation to suffocation, is the show's most powerful sleight of hand. It tells us that even the most essential things can become dangerous if misused or misunderstood. This inversion is what elevates the Silent Sea beyond a conventional sci-fi thriller. The show doesn't ask us to fear the unknown simply because it is unknown. Instead, it asks us to fear the familiar, because the familiar has been twisted by human greed, secrecy, and recklessness. That is far more unsettling than any alien predator. In this breakdown, we will go beyond surface-level scares. We will explore how the invisible threat evolves from a mystery into a menace, how it corrodes the psychology of the crew, how the series subverts our expectations through restraint, and why its themes resonate so powerfully in today's world. More importantly, we will uncover why the Silent Sea succeeds not just as entertainment, but as a cautionary tale about the costs of ambition, the fragility of trust, and the unseen dangers we unleash when we push beyond our limits. The Lunar Research Station becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a stage where human fear, desperation, and survival instincts collide. Each crew member is forced into choices that strip them bare, exposing not just the danger of the invisible threat, but the flaws and fractures within themselves. And in the silence of Balhae Station, we realize that the most terrifying sound is not the scream of a victim, but the quiet knowledge that death could come at any moment, from something as simple as a single drop of water. This is the unseen horror of the Silent Sea. And it is only the beginning. At first glance, the dangers awaiting the crew on Balhae Station appear to be nothing more than the kind of technical mishaps that space narratives have trained us to expect. A shortage of resources. A failed mission years prior. The gnawing suspicion of human error. These are problems that frustrate, slow down, or even endanger an expedition, but they do not terrify. To the incoming crew, these issues are survivable. Space is always hazardous, after all. Mechanical failures, oxygen shortages, or even interpersonal conflicts are risks every astronaut signs up for. But the Silent Sea is not content to stay within the realm of the familiar. The series begins with this illusion of control and slowly strips it away, peeling back layers of mystery until what seemed like a logistical issue reveals itself to be a nightmare that no one is equipped to handle. This bait-and-switch is essential to the story's structure. By beginning with the idea of scarcity, water running out, supplies dwindling, the show leads us to think in practical material terms. How much is left? How can it be stretched? How do we ration? But then, gradually, that scarcity is inverted into its opposite. The crew doesn't suffer because there is too little water. They suffer because there is a form of water that is too abundant, too volatile, too uncontrollable to exist safely. That slow evolution from problem to plague is what gives the invisible threat its narrative punch. At first, the crew treats the oddities of the station like clues in a puzzle. The locked-off wings, the incomplete logs, the strange secrecy surrounding past experiments. These mysteries frustrate them but do not yet terrify them. They believe that answers will lead to solutions. But as evidence mounts, the puzzle becomes something else entirely. The discoveries are not stepping stones toward resolution, they are glimpses of a force beyond comprehension. The turning point comes when the crew begins to understand the true nature of lunar water. It is not passive. It does not sit inert, waiting to be consumed. It multiplies, replicating uncontrollably as soon as it comes into contact with organic material. It invades the human body like a parasite, flooding lungs, suffocating from within. What should have been salvation, a substance to quench thirst, to extend survival, becomes an infection more terrifying than any alien predator. A single droplet is enough to overwhelm, and a single mistake can turn an ally into a casualty in seconds. From this point on, the perception of the threat evolves as dramatically as the threat itself. What was once frustration over lack of resources shifts into paranoia. Every sound of dripping liquid is a warning. Every body found in the shadows is a message. The crew's confidence, rooted in training and discipline, collapses under the realization that the station itself is a death trap, its walls echoing with evidence of past failures. By the time the full scope of lunar water's destructive potential is revealed, desperation has replaced calculation. The threat is no longer a problem to be solved, it is an inevitability to be endured. This evolution mirrors the psychological trajectory of many survival stories, but pushes it further by weaponizing something the characters cannot avoid. Hunger can be delayed. Oxygen can be rationed. But water? The very essence of survival becomes untouchable, and that inversion forces both characters and viewers into a state of cognitive dissonance. We are wired to see water as life, but in the silent sea, it is a ticking bomb. That contradiction is what makes the invisible threat so terrifying. Not that it is alien, but that it corrupts something we instinctively trust. The show also ties this fictional evolution to real-world anxieties, making it resonate beyond its lunar setting. Humanity has always feared invisible enemies, plagues, pathogens, contaminants that spread silently through air, water, and blood. The COVID-19 pandemic made those fears tangible on a global scale, but they have haunted us throughout history, from the Black Death to chemical contamination in modern cities. The Silent Sea channels these anxieties, giving them a science fiction form but never straying too far from the recognizable. Lunar water could just as easily be an experimental virus, a toxic pollutant, or a radiation leak. It is terrifying because it feels possible. Even more haunting are the echoes of ecological collapse. The story emerges from a world where Earth itself is running dry, where scarcity of water drives desperate measures. The crew is not on Balhae station because of curiosity, they are there because of need. Humanity has pushed its environment to the brink, and now the survival of billions may depend on extracting resources from beyond Earth. The invisible threat of lunar water, then, becomes a metaphor for unintended consequences, the dangers we unleash when we try to manipulate nature for our own survival. Just as Earth has become hostile through human mismanagement, the Moon becomes hostile through human interference. This is the narrative genius of the Silent Sea. It turns a basic element into a shape-shifting menace whose danger escalates alongside our understanding of it. At first, it is mysterious. Then it is frightening. Finally, it is apocalyptic. By the end, the threat is not just about individual survival. It is about whether humanity deserves to survive at all, given how it continually transforms solutions into new disasters. The evolution of the threat also transforms the crew itself. Their shifting perception of lunar water mirrors their own psychological collapse. Early optimism and determination give way to suspicion, fear, and desperation. Each revelation tightens the noose, not only around their mission but around their ability to trust one another. The invisible threat is not content to kill bodies. It corrodes relationships, sabotages teamwork, and breaks down the very structures that survival depends on. By weaponizing something as ordinary as water, the Silent Sea demonstrates how fragile our assumptions really are. What we take for granted as life-giving can just as easily be life-taking. What we think of as abundance can turn into curse. And what we assume to be human mastery over nature can flip, revealing that nature still holds power we cannot control. In the end, the evolving threat of lunar water forces us to ask difficult questions. If the crew cannot contain it, what chance does Earth have? If humanity cannot learn from its mistakes on Earth, will it only repeat them on the Moon? And most disturbingly, what other forces, invisible and uncontrollable, already lurk within our own environment, waiting to be unleashed? The simple hazard that began as a shortage transforms into a symbol of human hubris. The greatest danger is not the water itself, but the arrogance of believing we could wield it without consequence. And that realization is where the story begins to cut the deepest. The horror of the Silent Sea is not confined to biology, nor to the scientific anomaly of lunar water. If that were the case, the story would still be frightening, but it would remain at a distance, a problem of science and survival logistics. What makes the series unforgettable is how the invisible threat eats away at the human psyche. Locked inside Balhae Station, surrounded by silence and uncertainty, the crew begins to unravel long before the water ever reaches them. The unseen horror doesn't just drown bodies, it corrodes trust, hope, and the very idea of human cooperation. From the moment the crew steps into the station, the environment itself works against them. Balhae is not simply a research facility, it is a tomb. Its corridors are sterile yet decaying, its lights flicker with an almost mocking inconsistency, and its air feels thick with the weight of unspoken secrets. For the characters, it is a hostile landscape, not because of any visible monster, but because it strips them of their psychological defenses. On Earth, the crew would have options: escape, backup, reinforcements. On the Moon, sealed inside this station, there is nothing but confinement. That claustrophobia is a constant pressure, amplifying every minor disagreement into a potential fracture. Isolation breeds paranoia, and paranoia spreads faster than any infection. It begins with questions. Why were the records incomplete? Why is this wing locked? Why were we not told the truth about the station's previous failures? Each unanswered question gnaws at the crew, transforming allies into suspects and orders into potential betrayals. The invisible threat thrives in this environment because it does not need to act directly. It only needs to exist in the background, allowing fear to do its work for it. The characters begin to doubt not only the safety of their mission but the intentions of one another. This breakdown of trust is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the show. Humans survive not only through strength or intelligence but through cooperation. When that cooperation is poisoned, survival becomes nearly impossible. The threat of lunar water divides the crew, forcing them into desperate calculations. Who can be trusted? Who might already be contaminated? Who is expendable for the sake of the mission? These questions turn colleagues into potential enemies, forcing everyone into moral compromises that weigh heavier than any physical danger. As the crisis escalates, the necessity of sacrifice becomes unavoidable. The mission demands that someone take risks, retrieving samples, securing corridors, holding back an advancing flood of water that multiplies uncontrollably. Each of these choices carries the possibility of death, and each death is not just a loss but a reminder of how fragile the group's survival truly is. The calculus of life and death shifts from moral principle to cold necessity. A crew member is no longer just a person, they become a potential liability, a resource to be spent, or a barrier to be removed. This moral corrosion is the heart of the show's psychological horror. It is not about defeating the monster, because there is no monster to defeat. It is about what the crew is willing to lose in the name of survival. Do they sacrifice compassion for efficiency? Do they sacrifice honesty for control? Do they sacrifice one another to protect themselves? Every decision carries a scar, and those scars accumulate until the survivors are weighed down by the ghosts of the choices they made. The series emphasizes this through moments of stark desperation. When a crew member begins to show signs of infection, the reaction is not hope for recovery but dread of contamination. Fear drives the group to isolate, abandon, or even eliminate those who falter, because one mistake could doom them all. These scenes reflect the worst of human instincts, survival not through solidarity, but through exclusion. And in these moments, the invisible threat achieves its cruelest victory. It forces humans to turn on one another. Even for those who endure, survival comes with a devastating price. The survivors may leave Balhae Station physically intact, but they do not leave whole. They carry the weight of what they have done and what they have lost. The silence of the corridors may fade, but the silence inside them, the echoes of betrayal, sacrifice, and fear, lingers forever. Trauma is not something that can be jettisoned with the station, it becomes part of them, woven into their memories. The Silent Sea suggests that survival is not victory. Survival is simply continuation, often at the cost of pieces of ourselves that can never be reclaimed. This psychological impact resonates beyond fiction because it mirrors real-world human behavior under crisis. History is filled with examples of how scarcity and fear erode morality. During famines, pandemics, and disasters, people are often forced into impossible choices. Who to save, who to abandon, what principles to compromise. The Silent Sea condenses these dilemmas into the microcosm of Balhae Station, reminding us that our humanity is most fragile not in times of comfort but in times of desperation. The invisible threat, then, is not simply the water that multiplies uncontrollably. It is the way fear seeps into the human mind, just as the water seeps into the human body. It is the transformation of community into suspicion, of compassion into calculation. It is the erosion of what makes us human when survival becomes the only measure of success. And this is where the horror of the Silent Sea becomes lasting. Monsters can be killed. Diseases can be cured. But trauma endures. The survivors of Balhae Station are not heroes emerging from battle. They are broken individuals carrying invisible scars that will shape them forever. The greatest horror is not that they faced an alien threat, but that the alien threat forced them to become strangers to themselves. In the end, the station's silence is not simply a backdrop, it is a mirror. It reflects the silence of repressed memories, the silence of choices no one dares speak aloud, the silence of guilt that lingers when words fail. And it leaves us with a haunting realization: the invisible threat was never only in the water. It was always in us. One of the greatest achievements of the Silent Sea is its ability to defy what we think we know about science fiction. The show begins with all the familiar ingredients of a traditional space thriller: a secretive mission, a distant and inhospitable environment, a fractured team of specialists. Audiences naturally bring with them a set of expectations shaped by decades of sci-fi storytelling. We anticipate hostile aliens lurking in the shadows, malfunctioning technology pushing humans to the brink, or some corporate conspiracy spiraling out of control. And for a time, the show seems to encourage those assumptions. But then it pivots. Instead of giving us a hulking extraterrestrial beast or an apocalyptic machine, the Silent Sea introduces something far more unsettling: water itself. Not the absence of it, as initially implied, but its presence. The very element that sustains all life is reimagined here as an agent of destruction. That narrative switch is a masterstroke, a bait-and-switch that transforms comfort into terror. We expect danger from the unfamiliar, from the alien. Instead, the danger comes from the most familiar thing of all. This inversion reveals a profound truth about fear. What unsettles us most is not the unknown, but the betrayal of the known. When a monster emerges from the dark, we can categorize it, fight it, name it. But when water, something we drink, bathe in, and cannot live without, becomes lethal, our very sense of reality fractures. The horror works precisely because it destabilizes our relationship with the ordinary. That glass of water we take for granted becomes a source of paranoia. A drop on the skin becomes as deadly as a predator's claw. By transforming the essential into the threatening, the Silent Sea taps into a primal unease that no alien creature could match. The show's restraint amplifies this unease. In traditional horror, especially in sci-fi, the threat often reveals itself fully. The monster bursts into the light, the alien form is dissected, the conspiracy is laid bare. The Silent Sea chooses the opposite approach. It thrives on absence, on implication. We rarely see the threat in action. Instead, we see the aftermath. A drowned corpse in a place where water should not exist. A sealed-off chamber slick with moisture. A sudden scream followed by silence. These fragments force the audience to imagine what happened, and imagination is almost always more terrifying than spectacle. This approach aligns with one of the oldest principles of horror storytelling: less is more. The unseen allows our minds to fill in the gaps with possibilities far worse than any concrete image. A puddle becomes a warning. A faint drip becomes an omen. The true horror is not in what we see but in what we cannot see. By denying us the catharsis of a visible monster, the Silent Sea keeps us perpetually on edge. The threat is everywhere and nowhere, hiding in plain sight. And yet, the narrative genius goes deeper than technique. The invisible threat functions not only as a source of tension but also as a metaphor. In revealing that the deadly water was created through human ambition and greed, the series holds up a mirror to its audience. The real monster was never the lunar anomaly, it was humanity itself. Our endless hunger for resources, our willingness to exploit the environment for survival, and our hubris in believing we can control forces beyond our comprehension all converge into this singular horror. The water is not alien, it is the unintended consequence of human choices. This thematic layer transforms the story into more than a survival thriller. It becomes a cautionary tale. By setting the narrative in space, the show distances us just enough to reflect on our own world. The crew's desperation for water echoes our own global anxieties: climate change, environmental collapse, and the rising fear that the very elements we depend on could one day turn against us. The lunar water is not just a fictional hazard, it is a symbolic stand-in for every invisible danger we face on Earth: pathogens that spread without warning, pollutants we cannot immediately detect, and disasters born from human mismanagement. This is where the series subverts expectations most brilliantly. Many sci-fi stories depict humanity fighting against an external enemy, whether alien invaders or rogue technologies. The Silent Sea reveals that humanity is its own enemy. The invisible threat is both a literal danger and a narrative reflection of our flaws. The horror is not only survival against the unknown, but also confrontation with the consequences of our ambition. The structure of the series reinforces this. Each revelation about the nature of the water is carefully timed to undermine our assumptions. Just when we think we understand, the show reconfigures the rules. First, the problem seems to be scarcity. Then, contamination. Then, unstoppable replication. This escalation keeps us off balance, echoing the crew's own destabilization. By withholding clarity, the show denies us the comfort of certainty. We, like the characters, are forced to live with ambiguity and dread. Another subtle genius lies in the way the show balances science with horror. The water is not merely a supernatural curse but is grounded in biological plausibility. It mutates, replicates, and overwhelms, behaving like a pathogen rather than a phantom. This scientific grounding makes the threat feel more credible, and therefore more frightening. We can imagine such a mutation happening. We can imagine a substance slipping past our control. In fact, history is filled with such examples. Diseases that leapt from animals to humans, chemicals once considered safe later revealed as toxic. By anchoring the horror in possibility, the Silent Sea ensures it lingers in our minds as something more than fiction. The restrained narrative also respects the intelligence of its audience. Instead of spelling out every detail, it allows us to connect dots, to speculate, to wrestle with uncertainties. This engagement turns passive viewing into active participation. We become detectives, piecing together the clues, imagining the worst, and dreading the next reveal. That involvement is what makes the horror so immersive. It does not happen only on screen but also in our minds. Finally, the show's ultimate subversion comes in its refusal to provide clean closure. Even as secrets are uncovered and sacrifices are made, questions linger. Was the threat ever truly contained? Can such a discovery ever be controlled? What other consequences await from humanity's reckless pursuit of survival at all costs? These lingering ambiguities deny us the comfort of resolution. The invisible threat continues to haunt not because it is active, but because it is unresolved. In this way, the Silent Sea achieves what only the best works of science fiction manage. It uses the extraordinary to illuminate the ordinary. By subverting our expectations, it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves. The horror lies not in alien monsters or futuristic disasters, but in the mirror the show holds up to humanity's ambition and fragility. The genius is not simply in scaring us, but in making us realize that the scariest part was never on the moon. It was in us all along. When the final credits of the Silent Sea roll, the screen fades to black, but the silence it leaves behind is far from empty. It is heavy, filled with questions that refuse to settle, and echoes that reverberate long after the story ends. Unlike shows that tie every loose thread into a neat bow, the Silent Sea thrives in its lingering uncertainty. That choice is not a flaw, it is deliberate narrative craftsmanship. The invisible threat does not simply dissolve when the station is abandoned. Its weight persists, on the surviving characters, on the viewers, and symbolically, on humanity itself. Even after the revelations, questions remain. Was the lunar water ever truly contained? Could it one day return, slipping past the boundaries humanity tries to impose? What becomes of a discovery that powerful, one that promises survival but threatens annihilation? The show withholds definitive answers, and in doing so, it mirrors our real-world anxieties. After all, our greatest fears are rarely resolved. They are managed, postponed, or left to fester beneath the surface. The enduring mystery is part of the horror. It reminds us that the most terrifying threats are not the ones we conquer, but the ones we never fully understand. The thematic resonance of the Silent Sea lies in this refusal to comfort. By turning water into a symbol of both salvation and destruction, the show forces us to confront the fragile balance of our existence. We depend on nature's elements to survive, yet we exploit them recklessly. We seek innovation at any cost, yet we underestimate the consequences of tampering with forces beyond our comprehension. The lunar water embodies that paradox, a miracle and a curse, a promise and a punishment. In a time when humanity faces real threats like climate change, dwindling resources, and unpredictable pathogens, this metaphor feels chillingly relevant. The series also lingers because of its psychological weight. The invisible threat is not just a plot device, it is a mirror held up to human behavior under pressure. It exposes how fear fractures trust, how desperation erodes morality, and how survival often demands unthinkable sacrifices. Even for those who lived through the ordeal, the true cost was not measured in casualties but in scars, the invisible kind that linger in memory, shaping identity long after the danger has passed. By the end, the Silent Sea suggests that survival is never clean. It always leaves something behind. And perhaps that is why the story resonates so strongly, because it refuses to let us remain distant observers. We are drawn into its silence, its paranoia, its moral ambiguity, and we are left to ask ourselves what we would have done in the same situation. Would we have chosen sacrifice or self-preservation? Trust or betrayal? Would we have risked everything for knowledge, or would we have walked away? These questions do not vanish when the show ends. They follow us into our own lives, echoing in subtle moments when we are faced with choices that test our values. In the broader landscape of science fiction, The Silent Sea earns its place as more than just a survival thriller. It is a work that subverts, unsettles, and challenges. By focusing on the unseen, it harnesses the power of imagination. By grounding its horror in human flaws, it makes the extraordinary feel alarmingly possible. And by refusing to resolve every mystery, it ensures that its story lives on, not just in memory, but in conversation, in reflection, in the uneasy silence it leaves behind. So what do we take away from this journey? Perhaps the most unsettling truth of all, that humanity's greatest threats are rarely external. They are the ones we create, ignore, or fail to control. The invisible danger of the silent sea is not just a fictional hazard but a metaphor for the precarious world we already inhabit. In that sense, the series is not a distant lunar tale but a reflection of Earth itself. And now, the silence shifts from the screen to us. What did you take away from this invisible threat? Did you see it as a warning, a mirror, or simply a gripping mystery? What other unseen dangers, in fiction or reality, haunt you most? The story of the silent sea may have ended, but its echoes remain, urging us to keep asking, keep imagining, and keep confronting the uncomfortable truths that hide in plain sight. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones waiting out there in the stars, but the ones we unleash here, in the silence of our own world. If you enjoyed this video and would like us to provide reviews of every kind of movie, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.